Oscar Wilde was a novelist, playwright, poet, and essayist. During his career, he gained fame and notoriety as a wit, as an author, and as a homosexual. His plays and novels were regarded within his own lifetime as exceptional, indeed, as some of the greatest ever written in the English language. Yet he is perhaps more famous today for his trial and conviction for gross indecency. Oscar Wilde is seen as a man brutally, shamelessly persecuted for his nature, a gay man, and now martyr, a man who tragically fought and lost against a repressive and hateful society in pursuit of justice and equality. Perhaps, but this is not the whole story. In recent years, historians have begun to reassess Wilde's reputation and legacy, his relationships with teenage boys, and the circumstances of the trial itself. Here we look at the first part of Oscar Wilde's life, his fame, his literary achievements, and the events leading to his arrest and prosecution. Wilde was born in Dublin in 1854. Studying classics at Dublin and Oxford, his intellectual brilliance began to shine through, as did aspects of his rebellious personality, although sexually, he remained more or less entirely conventional, even demure. In fact, whilst at university, he almost converted to Catholicism. However, by the mid-1980s, by now married and the father of 2 infant sons, he met the 17-year-old Robbie Ross. Conventional histories mark this encounter as a step change in Oscar Wilde's personal life. Robbie Ross was gay, very open, and despite their age difference, far more sexually experienced than Wilde. It was Ross who introduces Wilde to gay sex. He introduces Wilde to a wholly new side of his nature. And Wilde enjoys it not just on a physical level, but on an emotional and intellectual one too. It appeals to his sense of an elevated understanding of love, in the Greek sense, a kind of secret knowledge. It gives him a cultural superiority. It elevates him as an individual and as an artist. The problem, of course, was that this was against the law. Since 1533 and the reign of Henry VIII, sodomy had been made a capital offence. It was punishable by death. This changed in 1861, which reduced the sentence to 10 years in prison. However, in 1885, with the Criminal Law Amendment Act, a new offence was introduced, that of gross indecency between males. This effectively made any male homosexual act illegal and punishable with up to 2 years in prison, with or without hard labour. Naturally, lesbianism was never explicitly targeted by legislation, due to the fear that any law would only draw attention to the offence and encourage the ladies to explore their sexuality. In the early 1890s, Oscar Wilde met Lord Alfred Douglas. The two began an affair that was to bring adventure, love, excitement, danger, downfall, and eventually for Wilde imprisonment and infamy. The relationship and activities of the pair quickly became an open secret within the artistic and literary scene of late Victorian London. It is their actions in the subsequent years that has courted the most controversy both at the time and more recently today, as historians struggle to examine Wilde's activities in light of modern social understanding of sexual morality. Is Wilde a victim of oppression, a hero in the struggle for homosexual or LGBT rights? Or was he something of a predator, a man who used his wealth, education, social standing and power to use and, yes, abuse, people much younger than himself, both young men and, it must be said, boys? Wilde's behaviour in this period was certainly reckless. Both he and Douglas regularly paid for male prostitutes. These were most always young men, around the ages of 18 to 20, much poorer working-class males, clerks, messenger boys and servants. When staying at the Savoy Hotel, Douglas would stay in bed with these young men to ensure they would be seen together by the hotel staff. When Wilde spoke with the hotel page boys, he would often end their conversations by kissing them on the mouth. And of course, whilst all this was going on, Wilde's wife is at home, alone with her young sons. At one stage, whilst delivering a pile of letters to her husband at the hotel, she asks when he will return home. "Oh, it's been so long I have forgotten the address." Yet another hilarious witticism, no doubt, but also cruel, arrogant, and pathetic. So in steps the Marquis of Queensberry. Queensberry is pugnacious in every sense of the word. He looks like a pit bull, and behaves like one also. He is energetic, bullish, and intensely homophobic. The modern rules of boxing are named for him, and he just happens to be Lord Alfred Douglas's father. He hates Oscar Wilde. Throughout Wilde's and the younger Douglas's relationship, Queensberry has regularly been threatening to expose the pair. He has confronted Wilde with a host of accusations regarding their relationship, and even accuses the Prime Minister, the Earl of Rosebery, of being a snob queer. When in February 1895 Queensberry leaves a calling card addressed to Wilde calling him a posing sodomite, Wilde decides to sue him for libel. It is unclear why he does this, and yet again it represents another point of contention for historians of the period. Is this Wilde simply standing up to a bullish, brutish, homophobic bully, or is it yet another example of his arrogant recklessness? Regardless, almost as soon as the trial begins, it becomes obvious that Wilde has made an enormous mistake. The Marquis of Queensberry and his lawyers appear at court with an endless list of witnesses and evidence that is sure to doom him. These are the names of the young men and boys whom Oscar Wilde has had sexual liaisons with over the past 3 years. And there is the unsettling testimony of how they felt used and discarded by the much older Wilde, some of them as young as 16 when the great man was in his late 30s. One 16-year-old servant telling the court how often Wilde would warn the boy of how much trouble Wilde would be in if he should tell anyone of what had transpired between the pair. An innocent remark, or classic tactic of emotional blackmail. At one stage, Queensberry's lawyer asks Wilde if he had ever kissed the boy in question. "Oh no, never in my life. He was a peculiarly plain boy," before realising the cruelty of such a remark. "His appearance was so very unfortunately very ugly, I pitied him for it." Of course, the fact that Wilde highlights the boy's appearance as the reason for not kissing him was itself damning in an era when any homosexual activity between males was illegal, a point not lost to the court. Wilde quickly dropped the case, his reputation and finances destroyed. The only question left was how would the authorities respond? What happened next, and the subsequent trial of Oscar Wilde, is the subject of next week's video.